Good evening, everyone. Thanks very much for coming along tonight. It's great to see you here. We've got two separate audiences tonight. We've got the audience here in person, and we've got an online audience as well, which is really fantastic. This is our first live event since March last year, so it's great to be catching up with people again, being able to present face-to-face, and this is our first live streaming event, which we're very excited about, and it was thanks to Julian Guess over here from Yarra Ranges Council who suggested, why don't you do a live stream? So the Bendigo Bank had just happened to give us $500 to celebrate their 10th anniversary, and this is what the $500 went into, setting up the live streaming tonight. So welcome all here, and to everybody who's online, I welcome you as well. Just some housekeeping for the venue. We need to keep some distance from each other, and if you'd like to avail yourselves of tea or coffee or biscuits, feel free to get up at any point to go over and you'll be served. If you go to the toilets, you go out of the door here and it's just around to the right-hand side. You just follow your nose and you'll find where the toilet is. The exits, we've got an exit out of this door here, out of the building, if there's any sort of emergency. We will be running the event right through without a break, primarily because of the live streaming, so that people online can have a continuous session as well. Tonight we will be able to have questions from the audience, but for the people who are watching online, unfortunately we don't have the facility for any questions, but if you'd like to send some questions in by email, we can respond to them after the event. So you just do that at contact@healesvillecore.org.au. So that's contact@healesvillecore.org.au, and we'll respond to all of the questions that come through. But before further ado, I'd like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri people who are the traditional custodians of this land. I'd also like to pay respect to the elders, both past and present, of the Kulin Nation, and extend that respect to other Indigenous Australians present tonight and online. I would like to thank the Yarra Ranges Council for the grant funding that they provided us that help us to run all of our events during the year. Without that, we could not run these events. So it's good use of ratepayers' funding, ratepayers' money, I think, to fund an event like this with Healesville CoRE. And of course, I mentioned the local community bank provided us with $500 to finance the live streaming tonight, and we're very appreciative of that as well. We've got three great speakers tonight with lots of very interesting and informative material. Glenn Morris, who many of you will know from past presentations. Glenn is over here. Put your hand up, Glenn. So Glenn is from a company called SolarQuip, his own business, and he does a lot of training and teaching around the field of solar energy, solar electricity, solar hot water, and there's not much that he doesn't know about that field. Glenn is our keynote speaker tonight. He'll be speaking for about 45 minutes or so, with about 5 minutes for questions at the end. Jason Parsons will be our second speaker. Jason's from Reclaim Energy, the company that Healesville CoRE is working with to provide heat pumps for the Healesville community. And Jason is the National Business Development Manager with Reclaim Energy. So welcome, Jason. Great to have you here. This is your first event with Healesville CoRE, and it's really lovely to have you here tonight. And the inimitable Julian Guess, Yarra Ranges Council Sustainability Team. You all know Julian, or most of you will. Julian's been working with us right from the very beginning before Healesville CoRE really got underway, when it was just an idea in my head. Julian's been a great stalwart and a tremendous connection for us as a community group between us and council, and has enabled a lot of things to happen behind the scenes, which wouldn't otherwise have been able to happen without his support. Thank you very much, Julian. So the timing tonight, I'm only going to talk for about 10 minutes now, and I've only got a couple of minutes left. And then Glenn will speak, followed by Jason, followed by Julian, and I will come in at the end just to round off. Healesville CoRE, for those of you who don't know, is a local community group. We're focused on trying to transition Healesville to renewable energy over a period of 10 years, and we're working very hard at that. Community groups are growing around Australia, community energy groups. There's over 100 now around Australia, all focused on getting the communities that they're involved with into an active involvement with the electricity supply through renewable energy. We've been running a lot of events over the past few years. We have offers for solar electricity panels and batteries and solar hot water systems. We have we are starting up this year a home energy efficiency advisory service, and we've put in a grant application for a microgrid for the east end of Healesville, and we're looking forward to seeing if we'll be a beneficiary of that grant in April or May this year. It's a $50.4 million parcel of funding that's being distributed all around Australia, so we put our hand up for a share of that as well. You may have seen from our newsletters that came out recently that Dr. Helen Haynes from up in northeastern Victoria, the independent MP, has just presented to the Federal Parliament her bill, the Australian Local Power Agency Bill, which is about providing a legislative structure from within which community energy groups throughout Australia can be supported. And the idea of community energy is that we try to retain as much of the money that people are paying for their energy bills here in the communities rather than sending it out to power companies. The idea of that is that all of the communities can benefit rather than the money going to a lot of overseas companies. And recently, Scott Morrison, in his reply to Helen Haynes, spoke very positively about what he saw as being the benefits of community energy as well. So it'll be interesting to see what happens in the near future. I think this is the age of community energy, where we're going to be seeing a lot more of distributed energy around the country rather than it coming just from the centralised services. It's going to be distributed much more amongst various community groups throughout Australia. I think this is a very exciting time for in the transition of energy in Australia. But without further ado, I'll finish up there, and I'd like to invite Glenn Morris to come over and take the microphone, and I'd like you to give Glenn a very warm welcome.
Thanks, Jeff. I might just bring this down a little bit. Not as tall as Jeff. Here we go. Cool. Thank you very much for the introduction, and it's great to be here with my community talking about my favourite topic, renewable energy. I've lived and breathed it for 30-something years now, and I never get tired of talking about it. Now, I've got a few slides here, but really, I'm a very loose kind of presenter. I don't have like death by PowerPoint. I love interaction from my audience, and I don't really want to have a 5-minute magic Q&A right at the end. Sorry, Jeff. You're welcome to interrupt me at any time, because you see something on the screen, you go, and you want to ask a question. By the Q&A time, you've forgotten it. So just go, hey Glenn, just got a question about that. Feel free to interrupt me at any time. And I'll repeat the question for the benefit of those coming in on the live stream so they can hear it as well. So it might seem a bit weird, but I'll just repeat your question if you ask one. That's where I live, at Mount Tilliboong, so little mountain out the back of Healesville there, above Badger Creek. It's an off-grid community. It's been there since 1974. I've been there for about 17 years. It's never been connected to the grid, initially because there was no grid, so they just had to make do as best they could. And the very early days, renewable energy was super expensive. So people had tiny, tiny systems, really relied on, old batteries and some panels they'd cobbled together from somewhere. But times have changed. Now renewable energy is very, very affordable, and even being off-grid has become much more affordable. Certainly in areas where you don't already have a grid connection, it's often cheaper than trying to get the grid put on. So yeah, it's become a normal kind of thing. We've got quite a range of systems at Murumuru Co-op. There's 70 people live there. There's a lot of individual power systems, like a home with solar panels and batteries, but there's also shared systems where a larger system services multiple homes. And we've recently added, in fact, it's in the picture here, a tiny solar farm. It's only 70 kilowatts, so it's pretty small, but it's one of these fancy tracking systems that follows the sun from morning till night. So that's just being installed at the moment. So we've now actually gone from having very minimal systems to having an insane amount of energy when the sun shines. And that's coincided with another revolution. It's called electric vehicles. So I'm not really an expert on EVs, but we recently bought one, thought it'd be nice to offer that service to other people in our co-op, and within 3 weeks, 3 more arrived. I think it is the time of EVs. It's an amazing feeling driving past a service station going, what was that for? Every day you leave home with a full tank of power. You don't have to think about going somewhere to get it. If you've got a renewable energy source, well, it's basically zero cost running. So anyway, that's been pretty exciting. So yeah, that's a little bit about where I live. Now, what I do kind of relates to what I'm talking about tonight. What I do is I teach renewable energy these days. I used to do it in face-to-face courses, so people would come from all around Australia and sometimes overseas and come to my facility called the Smart Energy Lab to learn about stuff. And a lot of companies would provide me with products so that I could teach about products, and so I got a lot of kit there. But these days I do this. I talk online to my students. In fact, this week I'm running a course, 5-day course, and my students are in New Zealand, Queensland, New South Wales, Victoria. So that's me just doing one of my online courses. But just for fun, I do a kind of toolbox tech talk every Sunday. So if you're ever bored on a Sunday afternoon at 2:00, you can tune in for the bad boy rapper who talks about tech to do with renewables and batteries. So that's my alter personality. We have some fun. It's live. There's an audience, just like this, except questions come back in. So that's a little bit about me and what I get up to. Okay, so let's focus a bit on tonight and explaining some of the opportunities in terms of using renewable energy. Usually one of the first questions I ask of someone who says, I want hot water, hot water, solar power, batteries, is what is your motivation? There's lots of motivations. It's not always the same thing. It may be that you want to save money. Now, that may or may not be true. Don't assume that just putting in a source of renewable energy is going to automatically save you money. There's an investment associated with it, but it's got so easy these days. There's so many incentive programs to make it lower cost. But you need to be honest about it. For instance, if you're in a rental property, your options are limited because the investment will be into the property by the owner of the property. You can't take away your solar panels off the roof and take them to the next one. If it's an installation of hot water, for instance, you can't take away the tank. It's kind of going to stay there. So it's a little bit more limited if you're in a rental situation. But if you own a property, your choices are more diverse. You might be motivated by wanting to produce clean energy. So it's not about saving money, but it's about saving the planet. And that's a different kind of motivation. Now, you can actually use clean energy without even owning it, by buying it. So buying accredited green energy from a retailer is actually the real thing. It's not fake. There is an audit program around it. They actually have to produce renewable energy. So you can actually just choose to buy renewable energy from a clean energy provider. Another motivation is self-reliance. Now, generally that means that you have some form of independence from a utility grid, so that you've got, if there's an outage because of a storm or bushfire, etc., you still have power. How long you have that, and it may be determined by the size of your system, the size of your energy storage. It's becoming very popular. Certainly in Texas, I imagine there is a boom at the moment in people wanting a bit of energy storage. I don't know if you've caught the news on this, but I'm working with some people in Texas at the moment, and it's insane. They have deregulated their electricity market, so your price of electricity is linked to the wholesale price, and people are getting bills for thousands of dollars a week because the price has just gone insanely high. So yeah, resilience in case of price spikes, in case of power outages, those are other motivations. You can do all three. So, how to reduce the cost of electricity? I have to be honest, the cheapest way is not to use it. The negawatts. So energy efficiency is one of the cheapest ways. But there's another way too, which is called find a better deal. Now, Victoria has the most deregulated electricity market in Australia, and it's very easy to change electricity retailers. In fact, there's this thing in Victoria known as the loyalty tax. If you stay with the same electricity retailer for more than about a year, the price goes up. It's a loyalty tax because they get you to change by offering you a sweet deal, but it only expires after 1 year. So really, you need to keep looking at the options, there's no benefit in staying with them. They don't change the poles and wires. It's all done with accounting. The lights don't go off and come back on again. It's just a paperwork process. So make sure that you're not on one of these legacy deals where you're paying a higher rate than you need to. So shopping around, I believe the numbers are around 10 to 15% can be saved just by choosing a better retailer. So reducing energy through use of energy efficient appliances. Now that's often an expense, buying a new appliance, but sometimes there's opportunities, like your appliance is starting to fade, you've got an old fridge, it's rattling away there, it's starting to dribble a bit of water out the back, it never gets as cold as it used to in summer, so planning for obsolescence and replacing it before it's actually a disaster. If you look at the running costs of an inefficient appliance, often the payback can be quite short. So looking for a better appliance with a higher star rating. Now those star ratings you see on products aren't a scam. They are, through the Mandatory Energy Performance Scheme, a regulated process to ensure that there is a measured efficiency benefit. So more stars is better, but also smaller is better, so smaller energy consumption. So for instance, a fridge, you might look at a small fridge that's 3 stars. It's not necessarily a smaller user than a large fridge that's 5 stars. Sorry, other way around, because it relates to the size of the product as well. So you have to read the label a bit carefully. It tells you the kilowatt hour consumption inside that little crest, and that's really the number that matters, the kilowatt hours per year that the appliance uses. It's very easy to look these up. There's a government database called energyrating.gov.au. There's even an app you can get on your phone to look for more efficient appliances. So you can sort by star rating, by, if you're talking about a fridge, for instance, by volume, by configuration, and come up with some of the best options. Now, I'm moving down here because more complicated options, or more investment too, which is buying something. Now, installing solar PV, solar hot water or heat pumps is a product that you're investing in that's going to save you money. So there'll be a return on that investment in terms of how long it takes to pay for itself. Those numbers keep coming down in terms of time because of the cost of the product, what it's competing against, so price of electricity going up, and also incentives from both federal and state governments. We really are in probably one of the best places, being in Victoria, because we can access federal rebates. We can also access Solar Victoria rebates as well for all sorts of things, and I'll run those past you in a second. I put down the bottom there, by the way, install battery storage. Even though I spend a lot of time talking about battery storage, I still think we're not quite there in terms of it being a financially sensible choice if your only motivation is to save money. We'll get there, but we're not quite there yet, I don't think. If you look at the warranty on a battery system, it might be 10 years. Typically it's 10 years. It may not have paid for itself over that warranty period. Also, unlike a solar panel, a battery doesn't generate any clean energy. It only stores it. So it's not a generator of renewables, it's a storage and shifter of when you can use it. Now, I like to compare, this is a little pass to Jason a hot water tank with a battery. People get very excited by batteries because they're new and shiny and they have fancy names. You know, brands like Tesla are so well known, and they kind of get too excited by the product. But when you think about what it does, it stores energy. Now, many of you will already have a device sitting on the side of your house that stores energy. It's called a hot water service. And hot water for most domestic users is the predominant, or the majority of your energy use is heating water. Certainly if you've got an old resistive element hot water tank, you probably, the stats are more than 50% of your energy consumption is probably going into heating that water. So it's a low-hanging fruit for improving efficiency, but also you can think of it like a battery because you can put energy into it by diverting renewables at the right time. So you might have some solar panels, you might not be at home during the day, and you may be able to time schedule it to your hot water to heat. You might have something that does what's called PV diversion. There's a range of solutions for this, but if you can capture that surplus solar energy, which after all is free, it's being generated from the sun and your panels, which you've already got, you might as well store it in some form, whether it's a battery or hot water. And hot water is one of those things that it's not time critical when you use it. You can heat it during the day and use it at night time. Sounds a lot like a battery to me. So if you were to consider a comparison on size, a battery of a similar storage capacity to a hot water system might cost you $5,000 to $10,000. Now that's quite a expensive hot water service. So you're actually finding it's a cheaper battery just putting a hot water tank in. Is my roof suitable? Yes, a question. Yay.
Just before we move on from that, so I don't have one of those fancy solar hot water things. I've just got my old tank, but I've got solar panels. So how does that work out? Aren't I capturing all that solar with my panels, and that is being used to heat up my hot water currently in my old daddy tank?
Okay.
How does that work?
So the question is, I've got an old style hot water tank and I've got solar panels. Is it heating the water in my tank when the sun's shining? Is that kind of the summary of your question?
I was just wondering,
Or how?
would I be looking at investing in one of these new solar tanks for hot water, given the current system I've got?
Okay, so I guess the question really is, so what was your name? Doris is asking, should she consider replacing what she's already got, even though she has solar and a resistive element, I presume, hot water tank, with something more efficient? There's a couple of things that Jason will go into this in more depth, so I won't steal his thunder, but how old is the tank would be a good question.
I think ancient.
Right, you better talk to Jason. Planning for obsolescence when it comes to hot water is really important because, organising a plumber, organising the replacement of that system isn't usually an instantaneous thing that you can do. So people often panic. They wait for the tank to burst, or they don't want it to burst, but it does, and all water leaks out, and suddenly they run out and get the cheapest option, which is the worst option. They haven't planned. So it's probably a good thing to think about replacing that now. But if you have a relatively, new tank, let's say it's 5 years old and it hasn't, if you're really good, replacing the sacrificial anode inside it is a good idea, but no one ever does it. Have you met someone who's done it? Oh my gosh, Doris has done it. Oh, good on him or her. That's great to hear. So replacing the sacrificial anode, which is usually in the top, there's a little thing you unscrew and pull it out and pop it in. It's a job for the plumber because it's under pressure, but the idea is it corrodes instead of your tank, so it can extend the life. But let's go back to your question, which is you have solar panels. Do you know how many watts of solar panels? 4.2 kilowatts. Okay. Now, one of the problems with a resistive element hot water tank is it's actually a very big element. Typically, it's 3.6 kilowatts, sometimes even bigger, but mostly 2.4 to 3.6 kilowatts. That means when it turns on, unless it's a really sunny day in the middle of the day, you'll still bring in some energy from the grid. Because even though you've got 4.2 kilowatts of solar panels on the roof, they don't put out that much after they go through the losses in the inverter and the fact they lose a little bit of power due to heat. So your 4.2 kilowatt system's probably putting out 3 point something, and that's only in the peak of the day. So if your hot water service is on a timer and it comes on at 10 and goes off at 5, chances are you'll still be using grid power. Whereas something that has a smaller demand, a more efficient appliance, and this is where heat pumps come along because they're actually small demand. What would be a number you'd use, Jason? 900 watts, or 0.9 of a kilowatt. Chances are by like 10 o'clock in the morning, your system's producing 900 watts. So you're not going to be drawing in grid power. So having a smaller energy demand is a big plus when you've got a water heating system and solar. Thank you, Doris. That was a great question. Cool. Yeah, so is my roof suitable for solar? There's this kind of bias towards you have to have a good roof to make solar viable. My roof must face north and it must be completely unshaded. My roof must be at exactly 30 degrees. All these kind of things people think is important, but actually all parts of your roof can produce energy. They just vary. This is a heat map of a roof, darker colours, hotter, more production. But I've actually put some numbers there in terms of energy production on a daily basis, or energy from the sun on a daily basis for a home in Melbourne. Now, a north-facing roof will definitely give you the most kilowatt hours of production, no doubt, if it's unshaded. But look at a south-facing roof. It's not nothing. In fact, it's about 75% of what a north-facing roof is. Of course, it'll vary with the seasons. It'll be very similar in summer and quite different in winter, but over the whole year, it's not that terrible. Of course, east and west will be somewhere in between those two extremes. So actually, all surfaces are viable. They just work less or more depending on the orientation. But probably a bigger consideration now is, unless you're lucky enough to still be on the feed-in tariff, the old 60-cent feed-in tariff, which is fading out. Is anyone still getting that, by the way? Oh my gosh, there's someone. You've only got 3 years left. It becomes a bit of a albatross around your neck after a while, because you don't want to upgrade because you'll lose that wonderful incentive tariff. Yep. So Chris has been hit with that one. So unless you're getting an incentive to export power, the main game now is to use solar energy when the sun shines. Time up? So yeah, the main game is to use energy when the sun shines. And the way to do that is to look at your options on terms of your orientations of your roof and how that matches your lifestyle. So for instance, if you have air conditioning and you run it a lot in the summer, in the afternoon when the house is hot, actually the western side of your roof will give you a better self-use than the north side, because you're maybe not home during the day until you come home at 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock in the afternoon, and the sun's blaring on the western side of your house and it's hot and you put the aircon on. So actually our orientations other than north can often be better when you look at the maximising your self-use. Now this is something that your solar installer can often advise you on in terms of what your options might be. It's got a lot more flexible than it used to be. System sizes, wow, they've gone up a lot. So when Chris got his, it was way back in 2007, Chris? When did you, I don't know. But system sizes used to be 1.5 kilowatts, but they've just gone insanely high now. That's the average. I mean, this is 2019, that's 2020, it's gone up another step. And that's because of a couple of things. The cost of solar panels continues to drop at an alarming rate. A good alarming rate. Government incentives, even though the federal government incentives are slowly being wound back, we've only got 9 years left of the government incentive program, the reduction in the price of panels is faster than the government incentive that's winding back. So it's still getting cheaper. And then you've got Solar Victoria offering you, from time to time, different release dates. It gets a bit complicated, but another incentive. So it's never been a better time to put solar on in terms of price. And this graph also shows something about what's the right size. Really, the research done by Renew, which used to be called the Alternative Technology Association, is bigger is better. Now you might say, well, I don't need a big system because I'm only a small energy user. But if you look at the economics of it, actually oversizing these days makes better economic sense, because every day isn't a perfect sunny day. So if you've got a larger system than you would normally need, even on an overcast day, you're not buying electricity from the grid during the day. So more self-use, basically. And also because the incentive program is only on the solar panels, adding more solar panels doesn't necessarily increase the cost much. The labour and the balance of system, the inverter and the racking, don't extend in price much after you get to a certain size. Now, I've got a few slides here just to explain that Solar Victoria has a range of incentives for people for renewable energy, the solar rebates. Now, they've introduced one for rental properties. Now, I'm actually not across this one, but I just looked it up yesterday. So, providing incentive to install solar on rental properties as an interest-free loan until the 30th of June. So, I guess if you're got a rental property, you've got an opportunity to dip into that one. There's the solar battery rebate. Now, this is quite generous at $4,174, so it's quite a big one, but you have to meet some criteria, and there's some postcode allocations, and there's a certain number released each month. So Chris is nodding a lot. He's been trying to get in on it. Yes, so there has been some supply and demand issues with some of these programs, so if you're interested, you probably want to be hot on the day when it's offered to get your finger in there. There's the solar hot water rebate, which I'll let Jason talk about. No doubt he's going to cover that one. But there's $1,000 towards a solar hot water system. And by the way, solar hot water isn't just those old-fashioned flat panels on the roof, are they, Jason? No, you can use things that use energy from the sun in different ways. For instance, using air through a heat pump, which Jason will talk about, is actually solar energy. Even though you can't see any solar panels, it's actually using the heat in the air to make high-grade heat to heat water. So it's more than just solar panels on your roof. There's the photovoltaic, or PV for short, rebate program, and it's once again another interest-free loan. So they're starting to stack up. You can't get multiples of these. There's some rules around which ones you can get. I think you've got to keep reading the fine print, so it's a bit of a moving target. I think Jason will cover this. And there's the federal scheme. Now, the federal scheme's been going for a long time. Back in 2001, there was a white paper released on renewable energy, which started the ball rolling. In 2007, I think it was, on the 8th of May, there was an $8,000 rebate for putting in a 1 kilowatt system. I still remember that day because I was a solar installer back then, and I went from doing one system every, 3 months or so to one system every couple of days. It just absolutely blew the market up. I think there was only 500 installers in Australia then. I was one of them. It was a very small market. Now we've got thousands of them. So this program is based on a certificate scheme called Small Scale Technology Certificates, and those certificates are an upfront discount on the purchase price of a solar system. It's both for on-grid and off-grid. Basically, up to a 100 kilowatt system, you're eligible for STCs, Small Scale Technology Certificates. The scheme's been running for a long time, as I said, but it's winding back to 2030. So it completely finishes in 2030, and the multiplier, which at the moment is 9 years, that means you're claiming 9 years of advanced production on your system, will be 8 years on the 1st of January next year, and then 7 years the year after that, etc. So it's slowly winding out, which is quite good for a government program, not to just like start and then stop. It's fading away gracefully. So at the moment, on a 6.6 kilowatt system in Victoria, you're going to generate around, depends on the certificate price, but it's around $36 at the moment, $2,500 of certificates. Now, you don't have to worry about that. Your retailer will deal with it. They basically take that as an upfront discount, so you don't have to do the trading, but if you really want to, you can. You can register those certificates and trade them yourself, but yeah, it's a bit complicated. This is a copy of a dummy bill. It was on a website, so it's not a real one, but it's basically showing you some of the important numbers that you need to consider when understanding what your energy use is. I mean, some people don't really do anything but look at the dollar figure and pay it. But understanding how you fit in terms of energy consumption and how it varies. So there's some numbers on here, such as your total kilowatt hour use, and also your daily, your average daily, how much is off-peak, how much is peak, and how much is shoulder. Now, if you haven't heard those terms, Victoria has a variable pricing scheme that most retailers offer now, so that there are different prices for electricity at different times of the day. This actually reflects the wholesale prices to some extent. So when demand is high, price electricity is a little bit more expensive. And also they have like weekend rates too. So you might see one called off-peak. Now that's generally either a timed off-peak, a certain time of the day, but it could be, if you've still got a really old system, there's not many probably out there, with what they call an off-peak supply. You've got a separate little meter that's just off-peak hot water, and it only runs at certain times of the day. Often those clocks drift and they run whenever they feel like it, but yeah, they're fading those out. All right, let's talk a little bit about the equipment in terms of solar. This is more my specialty, is solar inverters and solar battery systems. An inverter, a box on the wall, is the thing that does the magic. It converts DC power from your panels to AC power to supply your home first, and then the surplus will flow back to the grid. They come in a range of sizes and colours, but they've become a very generic product, if you ask me. The quality of them was pretty variable 10 years ago. There was a lot of rubbish on the market, but what we've seen is a bit of a shakeout in terms of quality. And so, really it's not like a lot of duds are out there anymore. But there's a very popular brand. I'm not endorsing any particular brand, but that's a very popular one at the moment. Things to consider is where you're going to install it. So almost all of them are designed to go outdoors, but you don't want them in direct sunlight. Now, this will be something your installer will help choose where it goes, but because they generate a bit of heat when they're working, you don't want to add to that problem by putting them in sunlight, because that can cause them to derate. That means they produce less power when they get really hot. Also, the screen, if it has one, might just fade from UV, so you might not be able to read the numbers. If those screens are becoming a bit of a yesterday thing now. A lot of inverters just rely on your phone, so they have a Bluetooth or wireless LAN connection, and you use your phone to monitor them. They do need some ventilation because they aren't perfectly efficient, so typically about 3 or 4% of heat is produced for all the power that they make. So they need to be in a well-ventilated area, so outdoors is ideal. And there are some alarms that they can raise, so it's a good idea to put them somewhere that you occasionally would look at it. So, not down the back corner of the fence where you've got to climb over all the rubbish bins to go and have a look. It might have a little alarm light saying fault. Now, it might be a safety issue, or it might be it's just not producing any energy. So you've got this box on the wall doing nothing and you didn't even know it. Often, the first time people realise that is when they get their next bill and it's just gone up. Whoa, what happened? Why is the price gone? Oh, the inverter's not working. So, yeah, it's worth having them in a location that you can check them from time to time.
I've got a question for you.
Yes.
We've got a big business, we've got food container and fridges and freezers. We've put a system in that was developed by a local guy in Healesville, and it will send a message if the temperature goes down below the assigned point, which is in Congress, to worry. A message comes up on the phone, a message comes up on iPad, it tells them straight away. Can you get something like that hooked up to one of those?
Okay, so just to answer or to reiterate your question for those on the live stream, you've got a cool container which has a temperature alarm that communicates with your phone. You're wondering if inverters have something similar. Many do. The app often will give you those alarms, or an email will be sent to you. So yeah, it's a pretty common thing now to have interaction through the customer's wireless home network. There's even some which actually have a SIM card now. So SIM cards are becoming a thing. So they directly communicate that there's a fault. Yep. It's actually a requirement they have some means of communicating it, whether it's visual, audible, or SMS or email or fax. It's in the standards. You can have a fax. Better turn my fax machine on in case an alarm comes in. But thank you for the question. Okay. Now, the word inverter, you'll see it everywhere. You'll see this box on the wall that makes cool air or warm air called an inverter. Well, actually, it's an air conditioner. It uses some technology which makes it work more efficiently by converting AC to DC and running a compressor. But these inverters go the other way around. They take DC and make AC. So DC being solar panel or a battery is DC, and they invert that to make AC power. There's on-grid inverters and off-grid inverters. So the one on the left is an off-grid inverter. It's just got batteries connected to it. There are no solar panels connected to it. The one on the right is a solar inverter. It doesn't have batteries connected to it. But you can even get ones which do both. These are hybrid inverters. That means you can have a battery and solar panels connected to them. So in one box, you've got both functionalities. These are becoming more popular with the advent of batteries, but also battery-ready systems. Now, that's another thing to consider. Often a hybrid inverter is almost the same price as just a solar inverter, certainly residential ones. And, you know, being able to add batteries at a later stage might be a consideration. So often, just for a few $100s more, you're getting the capability of adding batteries to that system. So hybrid. And then we've got the so-called, I put it in inverted commas, AC battery. Really what that is, Tesla being a very well-known brand, is a battery and an inverter in one box. So there's not two boxes, there's not a battery box and an inverter box. It's all in the one package. So the connections are only AC. Hence it's sometimes referred to as an AC battery. The advantages of something like this is, and it's not the only one on the market, by the way, but it's just the most popular brand or well-known brand, is that it can be very easily added to any existing solar system. You don't have to have a special solar inverter. If you've got solar, you can add a battery by what they call AC coupling. So that's one of the appeals of AC batteries. Yes, Walter?
When you use an AC battery, does that mean you put that battery AC, which means the solar panel goes to another inverter to use the battery?
So Walter's question is, being an AC battery, does this mean the solar energy has to come through the AC network? Yes, which means you need another inverter that has solar panels connected to it that makes AC power. So you end up with two products. You'll have a solar inverter and an AC coupled battery. Yeah. So like I said, it's ideal for retrofit, but it can be part of a new installation. In fact, Tesla have just released their own solar inverters recently too. So they do solar inverters and AC batteries. Yes.
Physical location, though. Talk about shade and ventilation, but does it have to be close to where the solar panels are, or say the electricity meter?
So the question is location. Does the battery system or the inverters need to be close to the electricity meter or switchboard?
Or solar panels?
No. So actually one of the nice things about electricity is it's easy to transmit it over fairly long distances if you size the cables appropriately. So, you know, within a residential installation, basically anywhere on your home you could put it. The distance isn't a big problem. But there is a consideration when it comes to batteries. Now this could be a bit beyond the scope of tonight, but there's new regulations around where you can install battery systems, like not under a window, not in a habitable room. If there is a habitable room behind, you have to have what they call a fire barrier, basically some cement sheeting behind it. So there's some extra regulations about where you can put a battery system. You can probably put it in a garage, but if there's a habitable room on the other side of the wall, you still need to have that fire barrier. So it's really tried to make battery systems as safe as possible since they're a relatively new technology. I mentioned earlier on that almost any roof is probably suitable for solar, but some more so than others. But if you have quite a bit of shading issues on your roof, there are some products that can help with that. Now, there's two ways you can go. One is what they call solar DC optimizers. That means each panel has a little box that goes on the back that moderates the power coming out of that box. So it contributes as best it can to the series connection of all the other panels in the system. Without it, shading on one panel has a very detrimental effect on the whole system. It's a bit like, because panels are generally connected in series, that means the output of one goes to the next. It's like standing on a hose in your garden. You're only standing on a little bit of the hose, but there's no water coming out the other end. But the rest of the hose is fine. You're constricting it, and that's what shade does. Shade constricts the flow of electricity through a solar panel. So these devices help moderate that. They actually provide some sort of sideways manoeuvres. They do add a bit of cost. You know, typically they're about $65 per panel extra, so they add some cost. And some can be deployed just on the shaded panels, and others have to be on every panel. So it depends on which product you choose. But if you do have a roof with significant shading issues, and in part, hopefully not all of it, these things can really help. This is an example actually of my neighbour's house, and there's a picture of a house from the sky, and those represent all the panels on her roof. Now she has those optimizers on the panels, and you can see that the fourth panel from the left is significantly darker, i.e. not producing as much energy, so darker means performing poorly, but it doesn't really compromise all the rest of the panels. And it's dark because it's right next to the gable roof, and so it's getting shaded in the morning when the sun's coming from the eastern direction. But it does its best, so it's still part of the system, but it's just about 20-30% less production on one panel. Without that, the whole system would be 25% less. Everything else would come down to the same level. So that's an example of when it can really help. The other way of dealing with this shade problem is tiny inverters. They're called microinverters that go on the back of every panel. Remember I said an inverter is, big box that goes on the wall? With microinverters, you don't have a big box that goes on a wall. You have little boxes that go on the back of every panel. So even though they look very similar to what I just showed you, they're different in that they convert at the panel from DC to AC. And therefore you've got just AC coming off your roof going down to your switchboard. And at your switchboard, you just got a switch. There's no other big box. So it can mean less stuff on the wall. It also means that every panel works independently of every other panel. And if you're a bit of an energy nerd, you get to see how every panel's working. So it gives you sort of a really detailed view of how the system's functioning. So if you've got a faulty panel, you can go, panel number 3, it's not working. But the rest will be working fine. So that's one of the advantages of both DC optimizers and microinverters. Batteries, as I said before, they store energy for later use. They can help shift surplus solar production, which otherwise would be spilled to the grid. It's called spilling. I love that word. It's like, an oil spill is a disaster. A solar spill is a sunny day. Yep. So you're spilling this extra power to the grid and not getting much for it. I mean, Victoria's not too bad. I think 12-13 cents for export at the moment. But, considering you might be paying double or more that, it's still better to use it yourself. So that's one of the advantages of a battery. But like I said before, you still got to purchase that battery in the first place. So it's not necessarily going to save you money. But it can provide other services, such as backup. Not all battery systems can do backup, by the way, so if that is a desire, you want to be able to have some independence, and I'd suggest that unless you've got a large budget, keep it to sort of just essential loads. It might be just your fridge, your lighting, but it won't be your hot water service, possibly, maybe a heat pump it would be, but it won't be a big load, because the cost of running a large load and a big enough battery system would be quite prohibitive. And there are many different types of battery systems. It's never been a more diverse market for technology when it comes to batteries. At the lab, I think I've got about 6 or 7 different types of chemistries. You might have heard of lithium batteries and lead-acid batteries, lead-acid being the old technology, but it's still around and it still works. In fact, it's the most recycled product on the planet by weight. Lead's very easy to recycle. But, there's flow batteries, there's aqueous ion batteries, there's molten salt batteries, there's solid state batteries. Every time I watch a science show, someone seems to invent a new battery. So we're at a very interesting time, but we are seeing a technology change when it comes to energy storage. Yes, Doris.
Limited backup, if you were looking to just get a little bit of limited backup, just for a few lights and maybe your fridge and not your hot water, just very, very roughly what sort of size of battery would you be looking at in terms of kilowatt?
Okay, so when I'll just answer the question for the live stream. Doris is asking, if you wanted just a small amount of backup capacity, not a big load like a hot water system, but just lights and a fridge, for instance, what would you recommend? I usually say when someone says to me, I want backup, I say, how much and for how long? Those are 2 things. The how much is the power rating of those appliances, and the how long is how big a battery system do you need to store enough energy to supply those appliances. So really this is a little bit of a technical discussion with your installer, but if you know what you want, I want my fridge to stay on, I want my lights to stay on, they can then work out what the demand is. So, it won't be very big possibly unless you've got inefficient lighting, but how long? I mean, how long do you want your backup to be for?
Well, we're pretty lucky here in Healesville. Generally, our blackouts don't last longer than 2 hours. So
Yeah.
I guess I'm thinking, an evening, 5 to 6 hours.
All right, so Doris is saying they don't last very long, the blackouts here. 5 to 6 hours might do her. So that would be the information that you would give to your installer to size that system appropriately. Can batteries be retrofitted? Yep, I got it here too. So yes, you can, and I just mentioned this one before, that AC coupling can be retrofitted very, very easily. By the way, that's my son when he was 2. He wants to be a solar installer. He's now 7. He's more interested in Minecraft than solar, but anyway, maybe you'll come back to it. Yes, so you can actually add an AC coupled battery to almost any existing system. Just you've got to find a suitable location for it and run that cable to it, but that's really all there is to it. But if you're putting in a new system, you can get the all-in-one solution, so-called hybrid, and that's often more, sometimes more cost-effective, but certainly more space-efficient. There's only one box on the wall. You also have the advantage with a hybrid system is that during an extended blackout, your solar panels still work. Not all AC coupled backup systems will still work. The solar won't work, but your battery will. So if it's a really long blackout and it's during the day, you go, oh, I wish my solar panels were working, that'd help. So that's a question to consider. Does the solar continue to work during a blackout? You may be restricted by the limits from your supply authority. Now, this is becoming a bigger and bigger problem, and it's not that they're trying to be mean to homeowners who want renewable energy. It's the fact that we've got so much renewables distributed across the grid. I just read today that we're up to 25% of homes in Australia have solar panels. It's the highest penetration in the world per capita, by a long shot. So we've got all this solar on homes doing good things, but one of the problems with solar is it's synchronized with the sun. It all works at the same time. Now, that can mean that it's particularly residential solar. If you're not at home using it, it's going to be spilling out to the grid, and the grid's got to absorb it. Yes, sir?
You were mentioning there are a few different types of batteries coming up and changing every moment, but is there any particular reason why you have to pick one or the other? What is the criteria that you're thinking about?
Okay, sorry, what was your name, sir?
My name is Rinaldi.
Rinaldi. So Rinaldi's question is, I mentioned that there's some different types of battery technologies, and what are the choices that you would make? Or why would you choose one technology from another? Ooh, that's a big question. It might be things like recyclability. Like I mentioned, lead-acid batteries actually, even though they're old tech, are very easy to recycle. It might be cost. It might be weight or space. So some modern batteries, say take for instance lithium-ion batteries, are quite energy dense. They don't take up much room. So you might not have a lot of space to put one. So you want it to be energy dense. It might be because you're worried about safety. I mean, there's some battery types which are safer than others. So, they can't self-ignite, for instance. It is a possibility that some batteries, when they go faulty, can self-ignite, though it's a very, very slim possibility. So those are some of the considerations that you might make when choosing a technology. Price is probably the biggest one.
Which one is right now price competitive or actually operating?
I don't like to pick winners. Yeah. It's just like asking me which is my favourite child. They all have their good qualities and their not so good qualities. Thanks, Ronaldo. Okay. So I was just coming down to the supply authority limitations that can be one of the things that restrict how much inverter power you can install on your home. So, Doris, you've got 4.2 kilowatts of solar panels on your roof. I'm not sure what size inverter you have. Yep, got you there. Let's say it's a 3 kilowatt inverter, I'm guessing here. You might find that if you wanted to add another system in parallel, the supply authority might say, well, you've only got 2 kilowatts of capacity allowed of inverter power. You can't put another 3 kilowatt inverter on if you're on a single phase installation. So I'm just making those numbers up because it keeps coming down. You have to check with your installer, they'll know the rules. Often they have to go through an application process and find out if it's approved or not. But I was trying to say that the utilities aren't trying to be mean to you. They just got to deal with the fact there's all this distributed generation that's just doing its own thing without any control. And so more and more regulation is coming in to try and limit that to some extent. It's really a little bit cart before the horse, if you ask me. But that is one of the implications. Last point was, if you're on a three-phase installation, you often have more capacity available. Now, if you're not familiar with what three-phase is, it's kind of industrial power, but some homes with big air conditioning loads or other services, commercial power might have three-phase. That automatically gets you access to more potential solar. You can put bigger systems in with three-phase. Monitoring and control is really the new thing. It's been around for a while, but now it's becoming much more of a mainstream, which is trying to integrate all the services to be smart in your home. So rather than your solar system producing when it wants to, your hot water service switching on when it feels like it, your air conditioning cycling up and down based on a thermostat, all those things can be a bit more coordinated through smart controls. So we're seeing that functionality being built into quite a lot of appliances. It's known as DREAD. It's a terrible acronym. Demand reduction in... I can't even know what the acronym stands for, but it's dreadful. Demand response something or something. Gee, it's getting late. But anyway, DREAD is built into things like air conditioners, things that cycle, and therefore they can be controlled by smarts. Demand response enabled device. I remembered it. There you go. So just finishing up, this is a home here in Healesville. A friend of mine, actually a former CoRE member, who put in a small system, only 1.5 kilowatts. They're a very efficient home, and even though they have a very small system, you can see that the yellow part is their self-consumption. So that almost all of their energy is being self-consumed, partly because they're home all day. Retirees or people who work from home are actually your best customers because they use the energy directly from the sun. They don't have to worry about storing it. And lastly, just a bit of economic analysis. I did a scenario. This is another local resident in Thomas Road we put a east-west array on their roof, so half the panels face east, half them face west, and we looked at the cost of the installation and the savings they made and what the payback was. And the payback was about 5 years. Now, this was done about 5 years ago. So I'd say that number's out of date now. It's more likely to be 3 or 4 years payback. But that's solar only, and they do have a modest energy demand. But if we were to add a battery to that system, because there was still some grid export happening, look what would happen to the payback. The payback actually goes right out to 10 years because the cost of purchasing the battery really isn't justified in terms of saving money. So I just wanted to make that point because people get so excited by battery systems. Anyway, that's my home. I'm out of time. I've got a bit of everything because I test stuff. So I've got solar PV water heating, solar thermal, heat pump, solar diverters, you name it, and it works beautifully. And there's my community, 47 years without grid power. So thanks everyone.